Well, yeah, that's right there, ain't it? Hey, man, we're up. We'll start here in just a second. Yeah, I'm gonna have to update my picture, man. It's got Roger Campbell. I thought he was in Freed Hardeman. Is it the younger one? Well, good. I tell him we can work something out here. There you go. Looks like we got us a fly in here. Remember when you had paneling and you was growing up as a kid, flies wasn't a problem. Now we got this drywall and white wall. You can see them a month away. How you doing? All right, class number 2. Here we go. Y'all ready? Definition of geography, we already just went over there. Boy, it's a big old fly, ain't it? He looks like, we talked about the Fertile Crescent. We talked about the Mediterranean Sea, Fertile Crescent. And here we're going to jump into some parts. This is the division of your, wish we had the book. This is not in your book, but there's our little, we got Lake Hula. You got Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, slightly west. Right at the top of it, almost on a straight line, is Jerusalem. And then up here, of course, the little part that sticks out so significantly in the Mediterranean, Mount Carmel, where Elijah has his contest with the false prophets of Baal. But then you'll notice you have these marked here. These are what we call the Transjordanic tribes. Ramoth Gilead, number 7 there, is highlighted because it's one of the 6. Remember you had 6 cities. What were they called? Cities of refuge. Yeah, if you killed somebody, accidentally, you needed to go there. That's one of them. That's one of the reasons it's mentioned there that's so important. But you have East Manasseh and West Manasseh, because remember it's 2.5 tribes. Tribe of Reuben, tribe of Gad. You have Simeon, which basically kind of just becomes swallowed up by the tribe of Judah, tribe of Dan. You also have a group of folks from up here in Dan, city of Dan. Remember from Judges how that city begins. Dan and Naphtali, you remember that from the book of Isaiah, because they're going to catch, that's the first folks that are going to catch the problems that are going to come out of Assyria, as well as the Chaldeans. That's, the price you pay for being that far to the north. And of course, as you saw, this Fertile Crescent, this is basically the freeway to get to Egypt for these other major kingdoms. You have some numbers here. You have Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon. This is just the different places where the judges came from. Also, the major prophets. You have number 1 is Elijah. Now, Elijah was a Tishbite. Number 2, Elisha. And notice where they are going to be doing their preaching. Notice where they're going to be doing their work. It's not down south. It's not down south where the more faithful people would have been. But they're actually prophesying to the northern kingdom, where the bad kings were. No good kings in the northern kingdom. Remember, you're going to have about right here, you're going to have a separation between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And that is a result of whose sin? Do you remember? Turn those wheels a little bit. Yeah, but who actually got the place divided up? Do you remember? He had a problem with women. Well, Solomon, that's right. Remember, his wives led his heart away. And God says, I'm going to take away the kingdom, but not from you because of respect for your daddy, David, but from your son. So you have Rehoboam. Jeroboam is given. Isn't that something? He is given the 10 northern tribes. God just gives Rehoboam all of this. Jeroboam, of course, Solomon's son, is going to reign in the south. Bad decision on his part. Never listen to the young guys, right? Instead of going with the older men, lessening the burden, he goes with the younger guys who say, really put your boot on their throat, And they say, to your tents, O Israel, what have we to do with you? They just quit. And so, but the first thing he does, you see Bethel here? At Bethel and at Dan, the first act that Jeroboam does is he puts up golden calves, one in Dan and one in Bethel, and it has made Israel to sin. They never repent of that. That never stops until they go into captivity and are no longer. And by the way, for all you good, faithful Mormons out there, that's when they got together and built those boats and floated over to America. Yeah, you probably didn't read that in your Bible, but if you had another testament of Jesus Christ, maybe it was in it. Absolute fantasy. But anyway, that's what they say. That's where Elijah and Elisha, your two greatest miraculous prophets, save Moses, that's where they're doing their work against that people. And do you remember Elijah got so distraught after he kills, at Mount Carmel, this is where they have that big contest. He is so distraught after that. Do you remember that he says, Lord, kill me. I'm the only one who loves you, and I've been a failure. Remember what God ultimately tells him? Get up, Elijah. What are you doing? Get up. I've got 7,000 people in the northern kingdom who have never bent the knee to Baal, kissed Baal. Now get up and go do. You got some things to do here. You need to appoint a king, and you need to appoint your successor, of course, who's Elijah. Then Isaiah, he is going to be in Jerusalem. He is in kingly courts. Isaiah was a mover and a shaker. He knew folks. He also knew what to tell them, and of course they didn't like to hear it. Jeremiah, he's from Anathoth, and Jeremiah, bless his heart, nobody would listen to him. And then ultimately Ezekiel is from Jerusalem, but what happens to Ezekiel? Yeah, he gets in the big deportation and does all his writing, and is a very important prophet to what we would call the remnant, the folks who were taken into captivity for at that point it'll just be like 60 years, but it's overall 70, starting with, and his, brethren, when you think about the job that Ezekiel had, okay, you got to tell these people Jerusalem's going down. And that's the last thing they want to hear. They're still getting postcards from home. No, we're good. It's only going to be a little while, man, and we'll be right back in Jerusalem, running the family business. And Ezekiel's job is to tell them, not so. And then Jerusalem is destroyed. And sure enough, his words are confirmed because he's a prophet from God. But do you know what his job is now? He's got to try to keep their morale up, because he says, you're going back. You're going back, and you're going to reestablish Jerusalem, and you're going to be what God would have you to be. But the frustrating thing about it, if you had come with Ezekiel, you probably weren't going to live long enough to go back, right? Remember, Daniel's been over there forever and a day. He's like 90-year-old. Says he was reading Jeremiah and said, oh man, it's time to go back. Then you have that wonderful prayer where he confesses the sins of his people in Daniel chapter 9. That's a beautiful prayer just to read sometime, of a great penitent man. Well, anyway, the land of Palestine. The Bible, you'll have this book next week, Lord willing. The Bible land bounded on the east by the Jordan River, on the west by the Mediterranean Sea was Canaan. Now, yeah, we do have some Transjordanic tribes, but that's, the exception to the rule there. He says the name Palestine is said to have come from the phrase Philistine land. I was listening to a guy talking about the Middle East right now. He talk about the land of Palestine. There is no real land of Palestine. Of course, we're talking about the time there was, but there wasn't. That name came from a World War I, when England put out a document saying, this is how the land's going to be divided there, and called it Palestine. It became the Palestinian Declaration from England. And so, who lived in Palestine? Jews, Christians, Arabs. It wasn't until recent events after 47 when the United Nations stepped in that you really have a real mess over there now. Well, anyway, the name Palestine is said to have come from the land of Philistines, and the Philistines, they were a thorn in Israel's flesh. Who was the first king that did a lot of war with the Philistines? Remember his name? He only had 3. Who was that? Well, he whooped Philistines left and right, didn't he? But there was somebody who's already battling them before he came along. Who was that? First king. Saul, yes. Saul battled them. David battled them. You remember who anointed those first 2 kings? He'd be your last judge. Samuel. Here we go. Well, we're getting them cobwebs out, ain't we? And then, of course, your last king is going to be of the United Kingdom, we call it, will be who? Solomon. How long did each one of these men's tenure last? 40 years each. Now, did David rule 40 years in Jerusalem? Trick question. No, that's right. He started out where was it? Oh, no. What's that? Hebron. Thank you, Jim. That's right. 7.5 years in Hebron. That's where he started having kids, right? Boy, he had a mess of them too. Well, anyway, and so those kings were known, and David was even told he couldn't build the temple because he was a man of war, busy doing war. Solomon, not so much. Solomon will make his kingdom bigger, make the kingdom bigger, but he will do it in more kingly-like ways, like marrying chicks, right? I mean, he does a lot of that and expands his, notice it says, later under the rule of King Solomon, Israel rule would be expanded to include about 60,000 square miles. During David's rule, you'll see there it was significantly smaller. Here's our land here that we're looking at. This is Palestine in the New Testament. Of course, everything is different now. That's one of the reasons the Sea of Galilee has 3 names, right? Well, that's confusing, is it not? Gennesaret, and there's another name. Starts with yes, thank you. 3, same body of water. You're going to go, what is this, a trick? No, it's just, what happens after about 1,000 years? People change names, right? That's exactly right. But just kind of keep up with the idea of where we are. Caesarea, of course, not a place, not a thing until the time of the Romans, right? When they would put these big works into it. A lot of money. And would really make these towns that were not all that something. Kind of like Alexandria. Just about every place on the Mediterranean Sea's got an Alexandria. They'd have a school there. They'd have a library there. They were teaching Hellenism. They were teaching how to be a Greek. That was one of the things that Alexander meant so much to him, to not only conquer lands and stuff, but to make them Greeks, you know. Reminds me of an old war movie I saw one time where the colonel's telling his private, he said, in every little Vietnamese is a little American trying to get out. And I guess that's what Alexander thought about everybody else, little Greeks just dying to get out, right? The Jordan River, the Mediterranean Sea, think of some of the things here. That's a breakdown, too, of the tribes. And we're actually going to fill out a map at one point where we will designate each one of those tribes. It's a good thing to know. It's just a good thing to commit to memory. Notice as well, physical features of Palestine. And see, that's one of the things people wanted to make fun of the Bible when they talk about that you had the man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And everybody say, man, people, that's not down, you know, and they're thinking it's talking north-south. It's not. If you've ever been out west, it's all about elevation, elevation, elevation. I mean, you may be down in the desert and or up in the desert, you know, depending on where you are. One of the things I didn't understand, Death Valley is one of the highest points in that area. And the temperature would be so much hotter. But anyway, it's about elevation. You better check the weather report before you leave home, you know, whether or not you're going to be able to make it over the mountain. There's places out in Yellowstone, you can't even, you know, schedule a trip in the winter. By that, I mean you're trying to figure out what you're going to do in the summer, but it won't tell you how long it takes you to get from point A to point B because all the roads are closed. That's just how they do winter. And so it's all about elevation, and the storms they get are just incredible compared to what we have. Jerusalem, way up high. I think, you know, God does what God does, and but Jerusalem is in such a hard-to-get-to place. And you really got to want to get there. Because chances are, if you're over here, you don't really want to go to Jerusalem. You want to go down here and beat up Egypt, or if you're Egyptian, you want to go up and fight the Babylonians or the Chaldeans, or maybe if you're up in Tyre, you just want to sail, you know, and do business. Jerusalem was an out-of-the-way place that you just really, you know, wouldn't want to go to unless you were wanting to kill a bunch of folks from Jerusalem, right? And so wasn't a thing that you'd, physical features have a lot to do with. A lot of places are just impassable. Notice some of the physical features. The coastal plain, that's where you would go out to fight, you know. You needed a flat area so you could see your armies. That's why Armageddon, things of that nature. If you were to use Megiddo, you know, it would be like, well, they wouldn't have a chance. It'd be like Gettysburg all over. Or you'd use a term like that. Well, everybody here in the South is familiar with the Civil War. That means something to us. In Bible times, that's just where you went to fight, Megiddo. Everybody goes to fight at Megiddo. It was a great place. Generals could see their armies and so forth. And so that's when, in the book of Revelation, that's not talking about some spectacular battle where you're going to get 200 million men into an area that you can't get 200 million men, and plus have blood that flows up to the bridles of the horses. And you know how you do that? Because you take all the weapons that work today, like rifles, and they won't work anymore, according to Hal Lindsey. Okay. No. So a lot of the plains, the hill country, some places were good for different kind of crops and so forth. The Leontes River, that's going to be one of the questions you'll have in this chapter, and it's significant. It's your farthest river. You got Mount Hermon, of course, that is significant. We've already talked about the two mountain ranges of Lebanon, the Lebanon Mountains and the Anti-Lebanon Mountains. These are all questions in the back of the book, just kind of getting you familiar with the Jordan Valley, very fertile. This here, of course, is not. This is the river of Egypt. And it's not the Nile. This is just a river, and it's kind of like the end of it. It's kind of like as far as you'd go and still be able to, you know, you're not in the wilderness, if you will. Today it's called the Wadi, and you can say it as well as I can, El Arish. Notice as we continue to read, the days of King Saul. Saul becomes king, and you just really had this loose confederate of tribes. And they would come together, but there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. And it was, you'd kind of have to get with some folks. Do you remember when poor old Gideon's out there doing all that he can? And he's having to whoop these folks all by himself. He started out, he had a big army. God said, nope, you ain't taking them. I needed you to make it smaller. And so he take it down to 10,000. He said, no, it's too many. So he takes it down to 300. And so then he's busy doing all that, and they're whooping people, and then they're chasing down these armies with the 300 he's got, and nobody will help him out. Do you remember what the children of Ephraim come to him and say, why in the world did you go do this by yourselves? Remember, they give him a hard time. He's like, what they don't understand is God is the one that told him to be in this position. And so I'll never forget, he says, faint yet pursuing. They were wore out. And here he was doing what God had told him to do. And so you had these loose Confederates during the time of the Judges. Judges chapter 2, verses what? 16 through 19 is that vicious cycle where Israel would get prosperous, everything be going good. They'd forget God, go paganism, worship idols. God would raise up a nation, go in there and make life rough for them. They'd get to a point where they couldn't do anything anymore, and they'd start hollering at God. Then God would raise them up a leader. You see that same thing happening for 260 to 340 years, depending on whose calculator you're looking at as far as how the period of the Judges went. And but God was their king until we get to Samuel, and then the people say, we don't want your sons. You know, they're not like you. We want us a king. We want somebody to go out and fight our own battles. Remember, God says, okay, Samuel, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. And so you have King Saul, but you got to love what Samuel tells them. Remember what God tells Samuel to tell them? They're going to take your daughters. They're going to make them apothecaries. They're going to make them cooks. They're going to make them confectionaries. They're going to be making cakes for the king. Your boys, well, they're going to be working for the road department. They're going to be tossing spears at people. They're going to be building war machines. They're going to be in the army. They're going to do, it's what's going to cost you. You're going to be paying taxes now. 10th of everything you got. And what they do? Sign me up. Well, anyway, just like today. Days of King Saul. Loose, it's starting to get better, you know. Immediately we have the problems when David kills his 10,000s. And so you have the days of David and Solomon. Now, you can see David's kingdom is not quite as big as Solomon's will be. Solomon will expand that thing out through different ways. The face of the land, we talked about the coastal plain, the plain of Sharon. That's something you see in Bible literature, as well as the plain of Philistia, where we have a lot of our battles from the 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, and so forth. Jezreel and its valley, the valley of Jezreel, I know you've heard there's Megiddo. You can see how it's kind of smooth. It's on the backside of a mountain range, and so it was a valley place where you could get in there and you could get after it if that's what you wanted to do. You have Shiplah, the low hills, between the coastal plain and central range. Just some, you can probably get better photos than this on Google Earth now. This means a lowland. It appears in the Hebrew Bible 20 times. It is a long rectangular area of soft limestone stretching from Gezer in the north to Beersheba in the south, and is about 27 miles long and 10 miles wide. In a sense, it's the area of foothills that separate the Philistine plain to the west from the hill country of Judah to the east. And it's great because it's a buffer zone, because they're going to fight each other constantly. Hebron, of course, is Jim was so kind a while ago to remind us, that is where David, that's where he's from. And so he'll go back home and he'll start his reign there. Ultimately, he'll move it up here to Jerusalem, and that will be the country seat, if you will. It'll also be where God decides that's where the Ark of the Covenant's going to rest. They're going to not have a portable tent anymore, the tabernacle. They're going to build a temple. And then you can see also an area down here that we probably won't talk about maybe till the end. This becomes significant with a fellow by the name of Josephus. If you ever read Josephus, man, I'm sorry. You must have been really bored. But anyway, I'm listening to it. Because I want to know more, particularly about the destruction of Jerusalem, because you have these factions inside. You know, you got the Roman army surrounding Jerusalem. There were a lot of Jews who were happy to see the Romans come through the wall, because what was going on inside was horrific. You had 3 different factions that were just killing each other. But anyway, this Masada here, that's big today in the IDF, you know, the Israeli army. That was a last stand. You know, that's where you had a fellow by the name of Herod. He built a summer house, palace like there. But it's, I mean, you can't get to it. I mean, it's just, you know, straight up. Looked like, you ever seen Devil's Tower? Just kind of like that. And there was a way up. But anyway, that's where they held out to the last man. The last guy didn't kill himself. They made a pact with each other to kill each other, and the last guy didn't kill himself. But Romans got there and said, we're not leaving. And they're saying, well, you ain't coming up. And they said, that's okay. Hey, boy, grab a bucket. So they started throwing dirt at the bottom of them and made a, you know, sage ramp. Well, anyway, that's how that worked out. A lot of great things when you're studying this. Notice the central range between the low hills, the Negev, and the Jordan River. Let's talk about, there's the breakdown of it. This is where you would live. This was, you know what, the things that amazes me is how many people live there. How many people live there today? I challenge you, you know, if you got some time, go home, look at Google Earth, pull up Jerusalem. There's a lot of folks living in Jerusalem. I mean, it's just as far and vast as you can see, just houses upon houses. It's amazing how much that land, how many people, you know, it sustains. The Negev desert between Jordan and Egypt, that'd be the wilderness, you know, where Israel wandered. You have Beersheba. Notice in Genesis 21:31, wherefore he called that place Beersheba, because there they swear both of them. Verse 32, thus they made a covenant at Beersheba, that Abimelech rose up and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of the Philistines. So here early on with Abraham, we have these two powerful leaders making a covenant with him in this area. Remember where Abraham had come from. The Ur Chaldees. Remember that Fertile Crescent? He was on the other side of it. So he's come a long way, and he's pretty good ways down south now. You have the Jordan River. That's, of course, so significant. We read so much about that. How many times did the Jordan River stop? You remember? How many times they crossed that bad boy? Well, you had Moses opened it up, right? They went through and they swallowed up the... then you went through with the judges, yes. The priests went down when their feet stepped in the water. The Jordan River quit flowing. They went out on the other side after all of Israel passed over. And remember, it was at flood stage. And so that had to be pretty neat. But there's a couple of other instances. Do you remember that? When the river stopped? A couple of prophets involved. Anybody? Remember a while ago we talked about Elijah needed to do a handoff, didn't he? He had to appoint his successor. You remember as they're getting to the Jordan River, they need to cross it. And he asked Elisha, what can I do for you? You know, this is it. The Lord's told me he's going to take me. Elisha says, well, I want double your spirit. And Elijah's like, boy, that's a lot. And he takes his robe, remember, and he smacks the river. River stops, and they go across. And then sure enough, here comes God. There they go. And it's just Elisha now. And so I guess he wants to test it out. Did I get that double spirit? Remember, he takes that mantle and smacks that water, and boom, there it goes again. That's 4. That's all that I can think of. Y'all got any? That's about it, ain't it? Yeah, that's a pretty interesting thing. Well, it's here you can see there's some beautiful, absolutely beautiful places over there. It reminds me a lot of out west when you have so many beautiful places but deadly. You know, I mean, you know, when you're in Wyoming, you're in Montana, boy, it's great. Yeah, like don't run out of water. Don't break down. You know, you're in the middle of nowhere. There ain't nobody around. You see these different areas here. Waterways of Palestine, the Jordan River, Lake Hula, which we said, remember, it's not there anymore. You can look up, they were having a problem. It was like a lowland, having a lot of problems with mosquitoes and so forth, so they dried it up a long time ago, and now it's all built up. So it's not even there anymore. You have the Sea of Galilee, which comes below it. And what is so significant about Galilee? You think about it? Who spent a lot of time there? Yeah, that's right. What is that? Can you see that right there? That's Nazareth. Yeah, that's not the rock and roll band either. No, that's the city of Nazareth. That's where Jesus basically grew up. Of course, you know, he did a little time there in Egypt when they had to leave. That's a long ways from Jerusalem, isn't it? I think there's something to that. I think there's something to that. But he was up there in this area right here, and what was it that the Nathaniel now, an Israelite in whom there is no guile. Do you remember what he had to say about Nazareth? Oh, good thing. Well, it comes out of Nazareth, Ain't nobody from Nazareth going to do anything. And, of course, it says that's that was a quote, but it's not really quoting so much is that, when Isaiah 53 is talking about Jesus, it talks about he's nothing significant, nothing special, nothing, he's not beautiful that you would, just, oh, there's a handsome man, or he wouldn't stick out to you because of his great physique or his great face or hair or anything of that nature. He was going to be an average man. And a lot of folks think that's what that's talking about. He should be called a Nazarene. Not that he'll be called a Nazarene, that you'll find that written somewhere, but then he'll be reviled. That, what good thing comes out of Nazareth? It's kind of like and maybe that's not it, but I think that's probably what that's talking about. It's kind of like in the first century, you and I don't know much about it, but if you were a real wicked, sorry individual, well, they'd say you were a Corinthian. That's how wicked, that place was. What do we have in Chattanooga? What do we have in the United States that we refer to as places they're rough, you don't want to go? One of them we call Sin City. What is it? Las Vegas, that's right. You remember in 2005 when Katrina came through? It was amazing how many preachers said they got it coming. That's what God did to them. Like New Orleans is any worse than any other city. Although they do have the Mardi Gras, right? Can you say that was the hand of God? Why, no. Can you say it wasn't the hand of God? Why, no. That's why we call it providence, right? Anyway, let's move on. We talked about the Dead Sea. It's a big body of water. It's the lowest point. Can you imagine that? And it's so much salt there that you can't drink it. There are no fish. It is pretty interesting, some of the things they found in the southern part of it. They think probably maybe ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah, perhaps, the cities of the plain that were destroyed during the time of Lot. Jericho, of course, we know about it. It's the first place that we go over and take. And what is that coming up from there? What's this right here? We've been talking about it all night. That's the Jordan River, absolutely. We were over here. We get here, the priests step into the Jordan River. It's flood season. It stops. All of Israel comes over. And then what do they do when they get to the other side? You're talking about a walk of faith. Remember what it is they do on the other side? First act they do. Yeah, okay, second act they do. Yeah, they took the stones they had. Remember they put 12 in the river. But what did they do when they got to the other side? Something you normally wouldn't do to a combat operation. All the males are what? Circumcised. That'll slow you down a bit from what I hear. Pretty interesting. I think it's kind of interesting. They've been out in the wilderness for 40 years and hadn't been doing that. And it had been a covenant since Abraham. Well, anyway, they do that. And so you're talking about a lot of confidence in that. Of course, the walls of Jericho fall. Joshua chapter 6. God tells Joshua, behold, here's Jericho. I have given it into your hand. And the interesting thing about that is Joshua standing over here. There's Jericho, and it's fortified, big city, walls, and so forth. And so when we talk about God giving something, he had to do something to get it, didn't he? Talking about God's grace. It's a great Bible illustration of God has provided certain things, but he's required certain things as well. Remember they had to walk around Jericho how many times? One a day for 6 days, and then how many on the end? That was a marathon, wasn't it? Boy, I hope it ain't a very big city. Notice the mountains, the Lebanon mountains. Boy, we've really looked at that. Mount Zion, Mount Nebo, Mount Carmel, Ebal, and Gerizim. Jesus answered said a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Well, we all just saw that Jericho is north of Jerusalem. So many people would tell you right there that the Bible is inaccurate because it has a man going north when he's actually heading south. I'm sorry. Got him going down when he's actually heading up. If you look at it as north and south. And of course, it's not. It's looking at elevation. Remember, elevation, elevation, elevation. And, you know, that's one of those interesting things. Look at this. You've got Jericho down here, of course, at at basically, you know, water level, 825 feet below sea level, because the bottom of the Dead Sea is almost 2,680 feet below sea level, over here where the water is, you know. That is absolutely amazing to me. But Jerusalem is 2,540 feet, so it's up in the mountains. And here you've got them down here, and notice the great disparity there of distance. You're talking over 3,500 feet from, anybody know how tall the mountains are around here? I used to live on Lewis Chapel Road on a ridge on that mountain. It depends on where you live, what they call it. They called it Dunlap Mountain where I lived, or Lewis Chapel Mountain. And it was 2,200 feet. And that's pretty high for our area. You know, we lived up there where it got snow and it'd be raining, you know, in the valley, and they'd be saying, but anyway, pretty high. But this is 2,500 feet in elevation, and you have such a significant low area to the west of them there. Amazing. Lebanon Mountains, we talked about them earlier. You had the Lebanon Mountains, and then you have the anti-Lebanon Mountains that are on the west side of those, two different mountains, and you got the little Bakara Valley that runs in between them. Notice the Holy Land, that's not what we'd call it today. At one time it was the Holy Land when the presence of God was there, but nowadays we like to refer to that as the Bible lands. And notice you have Mount Lebanon up there and Mount Hermon to the west. Mount Zion, significant to us. Isaiah would refer to it, and you know, that's where the law would go forth in Isaiah chapter 2, of course, talking about the establishment of the church in Acts chapter 2. You have Mount Zion itself, and man, what a transformation. When David first took that place, it was significantly smaller than it is now. In the time of Solomon, you know, Mount Moriah, what's significant about Mount Moriah, too? Why does that jump in your head? Yeah, Genesis chapter 22. Remember, a pretty significant event went on there, didn't it? Remember what Genesis 22 is all about? The offering of Isaac? Yeah. So here you are. You have what is that, Tyropheon Valley? I'm not even sure what that is. Got Mount of Olives over here. You have the Kidron Valley. Over on this side, you'll have the Valley of Hinnom. Now notice Hinnom. This is the New Testament times. It's greatly expanded. This is the Mount Hermon right here. Moriah, excuse me. And this will be the Temple Mount. Notice that it's the direction that it's facing. If you're at the Mount of Olives looking back, you would, you know, you think of Jesus, you think of the trek that he made. He would cross over Gihon in the valley of Kidron as he would come each day, that last week of his life. You think of the Valley of Hinnom. This is significant to us. What is over here? This is the landfill, right? Yeah. And this is where Israel at one time was offering up their children as sacrifices. Isn't that amazing? That's one of the things that, you know, when Hannibal, 500 BC, his daddy took him, they offered up their children, firstborn. You had to give it. By the time Hannibal was born, and they were Phoenicians, remember? Baal. Hannibal, that's his name. He was named after Baal that we read about in our Bible. That's Hannibal, the great thorn in the flesh of Caesar and all the Romans, if you will. But that's they started that, and Israel picked up on that and was offering their children. And it became despicable. By the time of Josiah, it became a place you could not go. It was, you know, taboo. But they turned it into a dump. It would sound like a pretty good place for one. Notice you have Mount Nebo. Mount Nebo is to the Dead Sea, right over to the right there in the red. Mount Nebo is 12 miles east of the mouth of the Dead Sea. This is where Moses died and was buried by God. You remember, Jude has a little bit to say about that too, doesn't he? Remember what took place with his body? Yeah, they were arguing about it, wasn't they? You know, isn't that in Jude? Y'all help me with that. Nobody gonna help me? Michael would be the one you want to look for. Michael will be the. What do they say about an attorney? You never ask a question you don't know the answer to. Jude 1:9. Yet Michael the archangel, contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses. But what's the significant thing about that? You've got an archangel, and he doesn't bring any railing accusations against the devil, but said, the Lord rebuke thee. I think that's pretty significant. You hear people arguing today about everything, you know, and here a pretty good thing to argue about, and he doesn't get, he maintains his place, if you will. But anyway, Mount Nebo, Deuteronomy 32:49, get thee up in this mountain, unto Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, which is over against Jericho, and behold the land. Couldn't even go over. Couldn't even go over. Just, you remember what his sin was? What kept him from being able to do that? Yeah, instead of speaking to it, struck the rock. You know, we could talk about some things I think have to do with that, but we won't. Who was the rock? Yeah, let's do it anyway. Who was the rock that was following Israel? Come on now. 1 Corinthians 10. Jesus, that's right. Jesus is that rock, that spiritual rock that was fallen. And that rock was smitten once, wasn't it? How many times was Jesus smitten? How many times did he die? How many times was he struck? It was once, right? Moses did it twice. I think, in my opinion, I believe that had a lot to do with it. That broke the type, the antitype type. Well, anyway, Deuteronomy 34:1, Moses went up to the plains of Moab and to the mountain of Nebo, the top of Pisgah. That is over, you know, it's once you read that, you'll never think about Pisgah, Alabama the same way, will you? That is over against Jericho, and the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead and Dan. It's amazing how many cities here in the South are named after, you know, Bible lands. I think of the one on the way down there to Florida. What's the name of it? Oh, what's the back way, like you're going down to the Gulf? Oh, well, I can't think of it. I'll probably remember about halfway home. I'm going to call y'all tonight. Do I have your number? Mount Carmel. It's where, of course, this is 1 Kings 17:18, where Elijah has the contest with boy, don't you just love that? It's just people, isn't it? People are fickle. How long halt you between two opinions? They answer him not a word. They're all tearing up the grass, throwing it in there, and see which way it's going to blow. It's going to blow for Baal, it's going to blow for God. That's not much of a stand, isn't it? No, that's just not good. Mount Carmel, like a thumb on the seacoast, rises 500 feet and just out. I encourage you, Google that. When you get home, it's interesting to see. Here Elijah confronted the prophets of Baal, and of course, there's some humorous things about that. We don't have time to talk about it. Mount Ebal and Gerizim. Mount Gerizim today is significant because remember when Jesus is talking to the woman at the well? What does she bring up? He wants to talk about, he starts talking about her marriages, and she wants to start talking about the race card, don't she? Well, what about racism? You know? Our fathers say we ought to worship in this mount. Well, that's Mount Gerizim. By the way, it has one of the oldest copies of the Old Testament. If you went there today, you could see it's Samaritans. There's just a few of them left now. They're kind of like I think there's a couple hundred, you know, that actually have the bloodline of the Samaritans. If you go to the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C., they got a whole room, big room, dedicated to the Samaritans. And who were the Samaritans? Let's talk about that for a moment. Remember the king of Assyria, what did he like to do when he took people off? He'd take them out somewhere. Remember he built them boats, sent them to America. I always remember that, you know. No. But he would bring people in. He would take people, he'd whoop somewhere else and bring them in. That's what happened to the Samaritans. You still had some Jews that were there. And, of course, you have interracial, you know, marriages and so forth. And so that's one of the reasons and what is said in the Bible about the relationship between, now think about it, what does the Bible say about the relationship between the Samaritans and the Jews? It's really quite simple. they had no dealings with them. Didn't say they hated their guts, wanted to stomp them any chance they saw them. You know, a lot of times we embellish all that, but the scriptures just say they just had no dealings. Of course, you can kind of see an attitude of the sons of thunder, right? When the Samaritans wouldn't let Jesus come in, what did James and John want to do? Smoke them, Lord, because you know not what manner of spirit you are. That's pretty great, ain't it? Mount Hermon stands about 9,200 feet and is at the Anti-Lebanon Mountains on the east side of the Jordan River. And so remember the Lebanon Mountains here, you have that valley in between, and then the Anti-Lebanon Mountains. But Mount Hermon be the one that you want to remember. And of course, that is the end of class tonight. There was a test that went along with this, but let's just go ahead and do this audibly, all right? Number one, what's the name of that river? Starts with an O. Isn't it Orontes, I hope? Something like that? What's her name's gone with the other book? You'll have books, by the way, next week. Orontes, okay. Number two there, what is that? Remember, it ain't there anymore. That's Lake Eula, right? And then number three, hey, you got three answers you could give there, don't you, Josh? It could be the Sea of Tiberias or Gennesaret. And then number four, what is that? Jordan River, absolutely. Number five, Dead Sea. Number six, that's Mount Carmel. And then number seven, yeah, you can't beat that one. Well, brother and I've enjoyed it. You've been great. And we are 1/4 done with this whole class. Can you believe that? Yeah, 2 hours, man. That's getting it done. Hey, yeah. Thank you guys for being here. You're just absolutely awesome. At 10 o'clock on a Monday night, you're down here looking at Mount Hermon.